Hello everybody, welcome to this fabulous picture show and this special screening of the Two Escobars. Could I please introduce the filmmakers? This is Michael and Jeff Zimbalist. This was quite an ordeal, you two. Tell us about how this film came about.
It was an intense year traveling back and forth to Colombia, where Mike and I have worked before, a country that we fell in love with. So we didn't want to make a two-dimensional historical documentary, but rather to have very vibrant archives. So we ended up purchasing from 47 different archive sources to put this film together.
So welcome, thank you all for coming out, and please enjoy the screening of the Two Escobars.
The Two Escobars tells the incredible story of the world's biggest drug dealer, Pablo Escobar.
Era tanto el dinero de Pablo que la revista Forbes lo sacó como uno de los hombres más ricos del mundo.
He laundered so much cash through Colombian soccer that he propelled them from a footballing backwater
Nunca una selección ha ganado a Argentina en el Monumental 5-0.
to global player. But that success was also due to another Escobar, Andres. The defender who, like Pablo, no relation, came from the city of Medellin and rose diligently to the top.
El primero en pegarle a la pena máxima, aquí está Maturana, Andrés Escobar.
The brothers Zimbalist tell the Shakespearean story of how Colombia's poor embraced its drug lords.
Cuando él se lanzó a la cámara, que la gente participara en favor de Pablo, y así fue como él llegó a la Cámara de Representantes.
While the elite declared war and hunted Pablo Escobar.
El Estado colombiano tiene toda la voluntad política de persistir en la lucha contra el narcoterrorismo y la organización criminal de Escobar.
Meanwhile, everyone was behind the World Cup bid the drug lords funded, but would ultimately sabotage.
Lo único que dijo fue, estamos amenazados nosotros todos. Yo salí para mi habitación, prendí el televisor, venían unas amenazas que las ponen a través del televisor.
Uno llamaba a Medellín, que en la casa habían ido las manifestaciones, que estaban pintando las paredes, que esto. Entonces fuimos a jugar bajo esa tónica.
Colombia defender Andres Escobar accidentally kicked the ball into his own net. Colombia, one of the favorites going in, was eliminated in the first round.
It was an own goal that would ultimately cost Andres his life.
Yo contesté el teléfono y me dijo, María, yo tengo una noticia muy mala para ustedes. Me dijo Andrés lo mataron.
Certainly one of the most emotive parts of your film, and dare I admit, I got intensely emotional, is when Pablo goes down. The only thing that we didn't see is how he came to his end, and I mean, it was pretty incredible.
Well, I said he went down shooting like in Scarface.
Mientras los ricos celebraban en Colombia y nosotros lloramos en las celdas de las cárceles, los pobres fueron a su entierro.
In his funeral, that great show of emotion does represent a side of him as a figure in the history of the world that I think many people aren't familiar with. There are those people who continue to see Pablo as an angel. And there's actually many more who see him as completely a devil.
There were a lot of benevolent acts that were shown by Pablo Escobar that really weren't reported by the American media, and it seems like he did a lot of grassroots support for sports.
I did a film in Brazil before this called Favela Rising, and a lot of the work that the drug traffickers in the favelas of Brazil were doing was to gain the support of the community, because the community then became their support system. And when the police would come up into the hills, they now had somebody that would notify them ahead of time. Why? Because they were building them sports fields and teaching them music and creating all these alternatives.
Se cree que es el criminal más rico del mundo. Su fortuna conseguida a base de exportar toneladas de cocaína a Europa y Estados Unidos se estima en más de $3,000 millones.
In Colombia, the genesis of that involvement in sports was not just a deep love for the sport, but also a need to launder money.
La única forma de legalizar ese dinero es a través de las lavanderías, de lavar el dinero. Y el fútbol mueve millones de dólares.
They didn't have anywhere to store their money. They were burying, they were hiding in walls, it was rotting. They needed to find a way to legalize that money and also to legalize themselves in a certain sense in the face of their society.
Un saludo muy especial para todos los deportistas y para toda la juventud del barrio Tejelo.
You guys don't go for the stereotypical vision of South America, and you also show both sides of the same story. But in the end, there's always a story of overcoming. Was that intentional from the beginning?
Enfrentamos rivales de mucha categoría, de mucha jerarquía y pudimos llegar a una final de Copa Libertadores y la ganamos de una manera justa.
Andrés did have a vision for Colombia that should use sports and culture as a vehicle to transform the national image to something more positive.
Los jugadores sabían exactamente quién eran los dueños del equipo. Iban a las haciendas de ellos y manejaban fiestas.
I think he knew that there was a shortcut that could be taken by using illicit money, but he also knew that there was something wrong. And that's a lot of conviction and wherewithal to have when you're that young and you're being showered with fame and fortune for the first time, and you've got the pressure of a nation on your shoulders.
Es grandísima la responsabilidad que todos tenemos. Pues todos estamos trabajando para una causa, preparándonos muy bien para representar bien a nuestro país y hay que estar bien presentados.
One of the things that is clearly really interesting from this film is the link between the two Escobars. Was this a link that had been made before in Colombia, or is this something that you unveiled during your investigation?
Told in the same story in this way hadn't really been done before. And it is, I think, partly because it's a very taboo and actually dangerous subject to talk about still.
Yo me llamo John Jairo Velázquez Vázquez, apodado Popeye. Yo calculo que a mi propia mano, pues yo he ejecutado por ahí, asesinado por ahí 250 personas. Pero solamente un psicópata es el que las cuenta.
But it was quite a process to develop the trust and goodwill with our subjects. An important element of that was our fixer, and Jenny Carolina over here, who usually works for the New York Times.
I think I'd love to hear from Jenny, her perspective. What was the most problematic interview to get?
La de la hermana de Pablo Escobar. Tiene mucho temor de hablar acerca de su hermano y también de lo que la gente puede pensar de su familia, como estar estigmatizada. Entonces ella fue un poco complicada conseguirla.
Yo nunca pedí que mataran a alguien o aprobé que pusieran. No, a mí eso me parecía horrible.
But we actually met Luz Maria Escobar in Barrio Pablo Escobar, which is the neighborhood that is now named after Pablo Escobar. There was altars set up to Pablo Escobar, and she's very much revered as well.
No crean en ningún momento que porque Pablo Escobar fue asesinado vilmente se va a acabar la violencia en Colombia. No sean ilusos.
When I met them, I said to them, I could tell that you fought a lot over this one, and they both laughed. How do you find as brothers? How do you find as a filmmaking partnership? How does that work together?
Well, I think it's great because it really frees each of us to work in the world that we feel sort of the strongest, the most comfortable.
I'm the guy who disappears into the wallpaper. I do the lighting, the sound, the shooting, the editing. Mike creates the relationships and asks the questions, and then we write together.
And I would add, by the way, that it doesn't hurt that I'm a big fan of his work.
Cute. He's embarrassed. He's going to tell me to edit that out. I know.
But that seemed to be actual filmmaking of all those important events. Who shot the film of actual events, actual scenes?
You're asking us to reveal our secret methods. It was a long, hard search. There was 3 weeks that I spent going into a broadcaster that had stuff buried away, and you walk into the room and they say that side is violence and that side is sport. And you go through tapes looking and digging, and Viviana Galvis was amazing, and she did this all year long.
There's a shot of Pablo Escobar playing soccer. That was from a confiscated tape that was buried then on the prison grounds, I believe. I had a call with Luz Maria Escobar, Pablo's sister, and I told her about it, and she said, no way. I said, I've never seen anything like that.
We also got private archives from the families. We were able to use footage from Pablo Escobar's family vault that have never been seen before as well.
When we get in some of these archives, I'd say, how is that going to line up with that?
Ultimately, through color correction and filtering and adding grain, we're able in the edit to create a fabric that it may feel like a patchwork quilt, but at least it's a quilt.
He would come back after a sleepless night and say, well, what do you think? And I'd say, wow, I'm in the scene. That's really amazing.
They often say that to move forward and to understand your future, you have to tell the stories of the past. And there's a huge generation, possibly in Colombia, that really need to understand this past. Don't you feel that?
Ultimately, this really was a story that was bigger than sports, bigger than narco. It was the story of the hopes and dreams of a people that were intrinsically tied to the success of this team, and about the great power that soccer has to not only change a country's image in the eyes of the world, but also, I think, to restore a sense of identity and self-worth in a time of horrible violence and suffering.
Everybody, could we please thank them here? The Zimbalist brothers for the Two Escobars.
Señor Presidente de la República, señores senadores, quiero comprometer y vamos a ser colombianos muy grandes, de la cual nuestro pueblo se va a sentir orgulloso.
Well, that's it for this fabulous picture show. How are you two coping there, separated now?
Well, we did ask to sit together, Amanda, but you insisted on sitting between us.
Because I want to suggest to you a whole new idea. I think you should make a big feature film.
Well, incidentally. We do have a project we're developing in Colombia. Jeff?
It's called The Scribe of Urabá, and it's about the First Peace community in Latin America, and it will be the next product coming out of the collaboration of myself and my brother.
Jeff, would it be inspiring?
Yes. Amanda, it will be inspiring.
There you go. See you on the next fabulous picture show.
How would you rate the film out of 10 and why?
Definitely a 10.
I would absolutely give it a 10.
I'd probably rate it a 20.
It's very rare that I've seen like historical documentaries that have such like passion and poetry. Like
from a sports angle and from a social, cultural, political angle, it was just a brilliant work.
It was very powerful. I always rate films in terms of like, does it make me think? Does it make me ask questions about myself, about humanity? And it did all that and more.